Chapter 3 of Book 3 of Hard Times shows Mr Gradgrind and Mr Bounderby discussing what's the best thing to do, and we see Gradgrind sort of changing his attitude and understanding that things sort of need to change and that his utilitarian outlook isn't all that, and Bounderby sort of refusing to accept exactly that. On page 220, on the second paragraph, we see Mr Bounderby's first procedure was to shake Mrs Sparsit off and leave her to progress as she might through various stages of suffering on the floor. Mrs Sparsit throughout is set up as this slightly hypocritical, moralistic woman, and again we get a silent woman who is literally lower. But I think the idea with Mrs Sparsit, what Dickens is trying to do, is set this woman up as quite a threatening figure who represents this sort of knowing and willing sort of entrapment and victimisation of women, and doesn't sort of change that status quo. And then Bounderby goes to see Gradgrind and basically, say, I need my wife back. And on page 224, just before the halfway point, we get Gradgrind speaking, and we get him say, I had intended to recommend my dear Bounderby. So again, we get hesitation there from Gradgrind. I. Very, very different from his sort of bluster and his very, very extensive speech right at the start of book 1. Dickens really shows that change in him. And then he goes on to say, should remain here and be attended by Cissy. I mean, of course, Cecilia Jupe. So that bit in parentheses, in brackets, I mean, of course, Cecilia Jupe, shows us again Gradgrind changing from saying, you're Cecilia, I'm not going to call you Cissy, to hear his first reaction to say Cissy and then to explain who that actually is. We see that Gradgrind's changing, and the fact that that's set alongside Louisa getting better shows that Gradgrind's change of attitude and this warmth and this love of Cissy, who isn't Cecilia, she's Cissy, she's a very different character, she doesn't fit into sort of neat names or neat numbers. It shows that that's what's, sort of healing Louisa. We get that Josiah Bounderby doesn't accept this, and about 2/3 of the way down, page 224, he says, I know the bricks of this town, I know the works of this town, I know the chimneys of this town, I know the smoke of this town, and I know the hands of this town. He's explaining basically that he understands that Louisa just wants things her own way, basically. He doesn't understand what this is all about. But again, we get this big list, and then right at the end, the hands of this town. So it's this big list of objects that Bounderby talks about in Coketown, right at the end, the hands of this town. Again, we see that objectification of the hands of real people like Stephen Blackpool, like Rachel, who were just seen as objects in Bounderby's eyes. He carries on, he means turtle soup and venison with a gold spoon, and that he wants to be set up with a coach and 6. That's what your daughter wants. Bounderby basically believes that what's going on with Louisa is exactly what goes on with the hands, that actually she just wants, as much as she can. She doesn't understand her place in the world. What Dickens is here doing, and he does it throughout book 3, is uniting the two subplots. We've got Stephen Blackpool and Louisa. We see in here that the problem with both is the same. It's Bounderby refusing to sort of accept that he'll shape this sort of system, and that's what's happened to Stephen Blackpool. It's what's happened to Louisa, and it's what has brought both of them literally down. Louisa down at her father's feet. Stephen Blackpool in a couple of chapters literally down at the bottom of a mine shaft. Gradgrind tries again on page 226, halfway down. I've already said I fear Louisa has not been understood. Is it asking too much, Bounderby, that you, so far elder, should aid in trying to set her right? Again, we get Gradgrind appealing to Bounderby's sense of reason. Dickens really sets these two men alongside each other. Gradgrind, who is essentially reasonable, Bounderby, who essentially isn't at all. He says, you have accepted a great charge of her for better, for worse. That's exactly, remember, what Bounderby said to Stephen Blackpool, for better, for worse. You can't divorce your wife. Gradgrind saying the same thing back to Bounderby. We see him exposed here as a total hypocrite in a way that Gradgrind isn't. Gradgrind isn't a hypocrite at all. He's doing what he believes is right. We're told, Dickens goes on, Mr Bounderby may have been annoyed by the repetition of his own words to Stephen Blackpool, but he cut the quotation short with an angry start. That idea again of Bounderby just silencing people if they're not saying what he wants to hear. And also that idea that, the hypocrisy there, that he won't accept his own words coming back to him. There's a bit of foreshadowing there as well, I think, by Dickens, where at the end of the novel, Bitzer uses Gradgrind's own words back at him when Gradgrind says, look, Bitzer, don't you have a heart? When he tries to sell, Tom down the river, basically, when he tries to sort of hand him into the police. Gradgrind says, don't you have a heart? But he says yes, and describes the anatomical process of the heart. So it's Dickens sort of foreshadowing this, that it's these men's own words that are coming back to bite them, these utilitarian figures' own language and their own words that's coming back to bite them. Remember, Dickens is hinting that throughout, that after autumn, where we get the garnering, we're going to get winter, we're going to get worse things, we're going to get revolution, and they've done it themselves. And then in chapter 4, Lost, we find out that Stephen Blackpool's gone missing, basically. And we really see again Bounderby's mistakes and Bounderby's inability to sort of see any compassion here. We find out on page 233 that Stephen's had to change his name. He's Kirk under the name Stephen Blackpool. He's got a bad reputation for himself. About 2/3 of the way down the page we see, "Oh boy, oh by George," cried Bounderby, shaking his head with a whistle. "He changes his name, does he? That's rather unlucky too for such an immaculate chap." Basically, Bounderby, sees that as a sign of guilt. The fact that Stephen's changed his name proves guilt. But I think actually what Dickens is showing is that, as Bounderby showed in the last chapter, he doesn't see these people as individuals. Stephen changes his name because he's not an individual, he's not a person, he's just a hand, and therefore this change of name represents that to Bounderby, and the way that Dickens is showing it in Coketown, these men are just interchangeable, they're not real people, they are just seen as a mass of bodies. And Bounderby's made this mistake himself, and yet he can't see here the fact that Stephen Blackpool changes his name actually is a sign that Bounderby's got this wrong, he's not seeing them as individuals. Rachel, as she always does, explains this. So the next chapter, "What," said Rachel with the tears in her eyes again. Again, Rachel, like Sissy, is a person of feeling, which is shown by those tears. She says, "What, young lady, in the name of mercy, was left the poor lad to do? The masters against him on one hand, the men against him on the other, he only wanting to work hard in peace and do what he felt right. Can a man have no soul of his own, no mind of his own? Must he go wrong all through with this side, and must he go all wrong through with that, or else be hunted like a hare?" Rachel's pointing out the fact that the trade unions aren't any better than the masters here. Both of them, these massive people who won't let people be individuals. And this is what Dickens is striking out against people like Slackbridge, who he sees as hypocrites in exactly the same way as Bounderby is. They are, manipulating people and not allowing people to be individuals. Stephen has been persecuted by both groups because he's an individual. And also I think there's irony there in what Rachel's saying, will a man have no soul of his own? Well, no, he can't, can he? In this world, in Coketown, they are all just hands, they don't have personalities. That's why Stephen Blackpool's changed his name, that's what, he's not an individual, he's just a hand, and that's what Bounderby set him up to be. And Dickens, through this change of name, is showing that total lack of identity. He does it again right at the end where Rachel is just a face in the crowd. These people, these hands, do not have a sense of identity. That's what Dickens is striking out as being a real problem with utilitarianism. He did it right at the start with Cissy being girl number 20. He does it at the end with Rachel just being a face in a crowd. On page 235, halfway down, Gradgrind is described. Compare this description to the start when he's square, he's got square fingers, square head. Here, his hair had latterly begun to change its colour. As he leaned upon his hand again, looking grey and old, Louisa, with a face of fear and pity, hurriedly went over to him and sat close at his side. Gradgrind is getting weaker, he's getting older. The seasons are changing in the book, and utilitarianism, quite literally through Gradgrind, is being shaken, it's being weakened, and Dickens is bringing this down quite literally, using Gradgrind's age as a way of showing that utilitarianism has to change. Next sentence is interesting. Louisa's with Gradgrind. Her eyes by accident met Cissy's. At the moment Sissy flushed and started, and Louisa put a finger on her lip. Silent communication through women. Remember, throughout we've seen women being silenced in this society. Very patriarchal, very male-led society. But here again we're getting two women using silence as a means of communication, as a means of strength. Sissy has done it with James Harthouse, Louisa does it here. We're getting that idea that Dickens is reinventing that idea of silence and using it as something that actually gives women strength, because when people are talking too much, it becomes bluster. It becomes what Gradgrind did in the start of the novel. It becomes what Bounderby does throughout. It's just meaningless bluster. And these silence women now actually using that silence to their strength in this utilitarian world.